Hi, everyone. Welcome to Robust Anglo-American Love. The title got changed today, and you all know why, because you know who's coming up. We're very, very pleased to have Paul Salveson with us today. But first, just a bit of an introduction. I'm Karen Karbiener. I'm the president of the Walt Whitman Initiative. We are a 501c3 nonprofit based in Brooklyn, New York. And our mission is to celebrate New York's literary legacy, namely, of course, the legacy of Walt Whitman. We're kind of a cultural activist organizer, and we host a lot of poetry-related events, including the one that you're just about to enjoy. Please follow us on Instagram and Facebook, and please do turn to our YouTube channel and subscribe to it, please, because we've got lots and lots of great past programs and future plans. And if you like what we're doing, we really appreciate your support. We have a support us link up at our website. We especially appreciate it right now because we have a couple of initiatives that really do need a lot of support. I think that I've mentioned before our growing Taine Whitman Library, which was started out of the generosity of Susan Taine, who is one of the world's probably the world's finest collector of Whitman right now. So she got us started on this magnificent library. And I'm very proud to say that St. Francis College here in Brooklyn actually will be donating even more books, and not just Whitman, but books on poetry, on American literature. And we are planning a soft opening of this library sometime this summer. It's located at 91 South Street, which I hope you go visit even if we're not open yet. That's Fulton Street Markets, which is also a nonprofit that we've partnered with. They believe in sustainable local food. So in New York, that's a really interesting thing, but people are growing food in New York on Staten Island. You can buy beautiful lavender from Staten Island and all sorts of delicious vegetables and fruits from Brooklyn and even Manhattan honey. So please go check out Fulton Stall Markets at 91 South Street down at the South Street Seaport. We are upstairs from there, not open yet, but we are planning it. And our curator, Andrew Rimby, has created a really inviting space where you can just enjoy books. You don't need a membership. You can just go up there and actually look at books, something that is becoming harder and harder to do. As for us, the Whitman Initiative, we're doing lots of things, including hosting the speaker series. And notice that we call it a speaker, not a lecture series, because we believe in this sort of public-facing conversation. Some of it is on Whitman, some of it is on Whitman-related topics, and always flavored with the type of democratic optimism that we have recognized and honor in Whitman's works. You'll hear from poets and scholars and neighborhood folks, and you can always watch these on YouTube once they're out there. So if you're tuning in live, thank you very much. You can put your questions into the chat. If you're viewing us later, thank you also for tuning in. A couple of notices. Our 19th annual Song of Myself Marathon. I can't believe I can even say it. 19th annual Song of Myself Marathon. We're going to have two this year because we could not decide whether we wanted just an online version or just an in-person. So we're having both. And the online version is coming up. That's June 19th, officially Father's Day in the United States. It's a Sunday. We're pretty soon going to send out the announcement and the call for readers. We always have 52 readers reading the 52 sections of Song of Myself, Whitman's great poem. And we also have a poster contest for that. Our board member, Ed Centeno, has donated $200, and we're looking for someone to design a really beautiful, creative poster just telling people about the Song of Myself Marathon. If you want all the details, visit our website, waltwhitmaninitiative.org. You can see everything up there. Submissions are due April 30th, so you still have some time. Also just wanted to thank Rutgers University for inviting us to their Public Humanities Conference on April 7th. And I was unable to attend, unfortunately, but Andrew Rimby and Jesse Morandi, two of our board members, went and represented the organization. We're very proud that the Whitman Initiative was chosen as a model public humanities organization. Very exciting, great company there, according to Jesse and Andrew. So thank you again to Kirsten, who organized the conference, and of course to Rutgers. And for that exposure for us as a small nonprofit, that's a really big deal. And today, very excited to be surrounded by friends, even if it's virtual. Behind the scene is Tristan Pullen, a dear friend, another board member of the Whitman Initiative, who through the kindness of his heart is organizing the tech. So thank you, Tristan, for being there. It would not happen without you. You've got a busy life, and we appreciate you taking this time and helping us out. And Tristan is enabling an incredible conversation that I've been looking forward to for months now. I am speaking with a dear friend, Paul Salveson, who is in Bolton, England, and I'm very excited to be on the same continent as Paul for the first time in a long time, although we haven't had much luck seeing each other in person just yet. But I'm excited to see Paul at the end of May, when Bolton will host an incredible Whitman Weekend on May 28th and 29th. So I'm hoping those of you that are listening and are able to join, please get in touch. You can always get in touch with the Whitman Initiative about this. We'll have postings, of course, on our website, but for now you can always write to Walt at waltwhitmaninitiative.org if you hear something and you need some more detail. Very excited to be organizing this with a performance of More or Less I Am. Oh, sorry, no, of the film version. It's going to be very exciting. Compagnia de Columbari has partnered with us and will be showing the films that they had made during COVID. Absolutely stunning films. And a regular poetry event with live speakers, with young people, lots of amazing energy. I will be hosting a do-it-yourself Leaves of Grass bookbinding workshop, and I think that might be on Friday, actually, May 27th. I still have to look at the schedule, but we have lots of things planned. None of this would happen without Dr. Paul Salveson of Bolton, England. Paul points Whitmanites to Bolton. Bolton had a stronghold of Whitman followers during Whitman's own day, but that sort of dwindled out. And Paul Salveson here was the person who reinitiated the Whitman Walk in the 1980s, and that's still going strong. That's going to be May 28th, 2022. So we're excited to go up there with Paul. What can I say about Paul? I have so many things, Paul, to say, but first of all, I want to welcome you, and it's so good to see you.
Yeah, and great to see you.
And you are tuning in from Bolton in Northern England. This is, maybe I'm going to let you spell it all out, but I thought maybe one way we can get into this is just to ask you how you would represent yourself. Like, who is Paul Salveson? You're doing so many different things. For a lot of Whitmanites, Paul is most famous for a very important book called With Walt Whitman in Bolton. And the Whitman scholars out there know With Walt Whitman in Camden, which is a series of copious notes that Horace Traubel took towards the end of Whitman's life, documenting everything that Walt said and did. Paul decided to do his own version of this, documenting the Bolton circle, the fans and the disciples, if you will, that Whitman has had through time in Northern England. So we all love that book, but Paul is prolific. He's done a lot more than that. He's done translations. He's just about to come out with a short story collection that he just told me about. He is a professor. He is an activist, a local activist. He's a historian, particularly of the rail. So we have a very exciting life to talk about in less than an hour. Paul, where would you begin if you, and I guess I'm asking you, if you're introducing yourself, how do you introduce yourself first?
Okay, well, first of all, I'll introduce myself by saying greetings from Bolton. Good evening. It's evening in Bolton, early afternoon in New York, and it's quite a nice sunny evening actually. And for those people watching who maybe have heard of Bolton but don't know exactly where we are, in the north of England, about 10 miles north of Manchester. But Bolton's very much its own place. It's a town of about 180,000 people, so quite a big place, very much based historically on textiles. So I was born and bred in Bolton. I spent 25 years living in Yorkshire, which is a historic Ramagles, but actually we do in fact get on. It's a bit of a family joke, this rivalry between Lancashire and Yorkshire. And I suppose most people that know me or know of me mainly know me through the railways. And I've been involved for the last 30 odd years, I suppose, in strengthening community links between railways and local communities. And in a voluntary capacity, I chair the Community Rail Partnership that's based in Bolton. But there is a link there, of course, and Whitman was an avid rail fan in his day, and
he was. That's so true. I know him as a great supporter of the very early, I think it was actually the first real train company in the United States, right? The Long Island Railroad.
Right, yeah, it was certainly a very early one, wasn't it? And he loved traveling by rail. And when I was going through the Whitman archives in the Library of Congress in the 80s, I came across lots of railroad timetables from the 1870s and 1880s, whether he was sort of planning a journey, because he didn't actually travel that much outside of the New York area, really, did he? I think he sometimes pretended he did.
He went to Colorado, and he also went up to Canada, and I believe he took the rail both times, so it very well could be.
Yeah. So and today, earlier on, I was hosting a visit from a very nice lady who's based over in Lincolnshire, who's doing the community rail partnership over there, and was able to show her the bridge on Bolton Station has got several poems displayed, including To a Locomotive in Winter. So we celebrate the Whitman connection on Bolton Station. So every day, thousands of commuters getting off or getting on trains will see some Whitman poetry. And there's other poems as well on the station. So
what is the other one besides To a Locomotive in Winter? That's
the one. I was afraid you're going to ask me that because I can't remember the title. It's got an Indian setting. What would it be called?
Oh, Passage to India.
Passage to India, yeah, which has a section that mentions the railways, and obviously we've got a very big Indian community in Bolton, so it's a link with the Asian community in the Bolton area as well. So that's proved a very popular one. And we've also got more recently poems by local contemporary poets displayed, and there's some really great stuff, and it's nice having Whitman there in the middle of it.
So it's become, I mean, is that since your time that Bolton has become sort of a cultural hub in that way, that, you know, in the railway station you see poems? And
yeah, the Bolton Initiative, I suppose I was very much involved in starting that. We've got a gallery on one of the platforms. We just started a new exhibition today, actually, by a great young artist who's local. He used to work on the railways, actually. I knew him when he was a station cleaner. And so he's working as an artist and got some great stuff. And so that exhibition's running over the next few weeks. And we've already had quite a few people in. So we're using some of the space on Bolton. So it's a big station, more or less completely rebuilt about 1900. So there's lots and lots of rooms that have been empty for years. So we're bringing them back to use as community space, say a gallery, meeting rooms. There's one room that doubles up as a small cinema where we used it as a base for the Bolton Film Festival last year, which is becoming a really big event. so that there's more and more things going on at the station, and that's just happened in the last 3 or 4 years, actually.
It's an incredible place. I know it because I've been there several times, and the museum is quite good too.
It is. We're very proud of the museum. It's a great place, and the people who work there are so incredibly helpful, and so proud of the Whitman heritage. You know, I couldn't have done a half of what I've done over the years in terms of promoting the Whitman link with Bolton and Lancashire without the engagement of the people, including people like Julie Lamara and Matt Watson today, who are passionate advocates of the Whitman connection. And Julie herself has done quite a lot of work on Minnie Whiteside, who was a key figure in the later years, I suppose, of the Bolton Whitman group.
Am I right in recalling that you all have his canary?
Yes.
so just in case there are, you know, and I'm sure there are Whitman fanatics out there, it's worth the trip just to see the canary, because the canary is there. The song itself is there, but there's actually quite a bit. And I remember going to also Manchester, not too far away, to is it the Rylands?
Yeah,
Library?
John Rylands Library, yeah.
John Rylands Library, which also has some pretty extraordinary, maybe not a lot, but some really meaningful, wonderful stuff that was collected by the Whitmanites, I suppose, and just left there. And so has become a real stop for.
I keep needing to go back to the Rylands and do some more work there, actually, particularly on one of the main characters in the Whitman group, who was Charles Sixsmith, who left most of his archive to the John Rylands Library rather than Bolton Library.
Why was that?
They fell out. There was an argument. Most of the archives from Wallace and Dr. Johnston was left with Bolton Library. It was the obvious place to leave it. But there was an argument between, because Sixsmith was quite a querulous person in some way, a great guy, very interesting man in lots and lots of ways. But he fell out with Bolton Library for ridiculous reasons, really. And so he said, right, well, I'm going to leave my archive to John Rylands.
Well, thankfully, it's not too far away.
We're 10 miles away. So
right. It's still a viable stop when you're visiting Bolton. Yeah. Now, just to take it all the way back, Paul, it's Wallace and Johnston that really made Bolton, put Bolton on the map as a Whitmanite place, right? Do you want to just give us a few details?
Yeah. Wallace, remarkable guy, and everybody who knew him testifies to how amazing he was. If you read what he writes, you think he seems a bit dry, to be honest. But his personality,
love it. The truth must come out.
It completely belied how he wrote and how he seems to have spoken. So he was the son of a working class couple. Dad was an engineer, spent a lot of his time in Russia fitting up the textile mills there. So he was a textile engineer. That was Bolton's big strength, with a particular specialism in textile engineering, and Russia was one of the main places where Bolton engineers went out to work. So he wasn't around that much, actually, in Wallace's youth. They lived in a very, very mean, dismal 2 up, 2 down, we call it, in Lancashire, terrace cottage in the centre of Bolton, long since demolished, although we have got a plaque on the building that's replaced it. And he used to host meetings once a week, like an early example of a book club, where they would discuss different novels or works of poetry, mainstream writers, the sort of Tennyson, Byron, Shakespeare, of course. But and this, we're talking about the 1880s here. And the group itself, it's all men. And they all tended to be, as in the words of Fred Wilde, who's one of the more eccentric members, they were all young gaffers. Gaffers is a great Northern English word about, somebody who's supervisory, a bit of a small boss, if you like. And Wallace himself, although he was from this sort of quite very modest working class family background, he was highly intelligent, and he got a job working with a firm of architects, Bradshaw and Gass, who was still around. And there's a very interesting exhibition on. If you come in May, the exhibition will still be on. It includes a photograph of Wallace on a works outing, and a staff trip out to somewhere in North Wales. So he became although he never qualified as an architect, he was certainly very competent in terms of doing building designs. And so he was probably typical of that, if you like, lower to middle class. You mentioned Johnston. He was a doctor, a local family doctor, Scots, very proud of his Scots heritage from Annan, quite near the English border. And between them, as you say, they were the driving force behind the early days of the group. Johnston was the more outgoing of the two, and he was involved in lots of different things in Bolton civic life. He was involved in the town planning society. He was involved in various literary and medical activities, and he did such a lot of things on a charitable basis. He did a lot of work with the railways in terms of running classes in we call them ambulance classes back in those days, but advising railway employees on basic first aid, things like that he just did in his own time. So a fantastic guy, and his diaries are all there, well, most of them anyway, in Bolton Library. Once you get used to his scroll, typical doctor's scroll, very, very interesting, in particularly when he was a doctor during the First World War, because he was a pacifist at heart and absolutely hated what was going on, but his heart really went out to the suffering of the young soldiers who were coming back from the front with horrendous injuries.
He's really the one behind the book, and I'm forgetting the title of it, the Wallace and Johnston book about visiting.
Yeah.
And one of the things that in the book are their visits to Whitman, actually to Whitman and to the birthplace on Long Island.
Yeah, it was visits to Walt Whitman, although originally Johnston wrote a single volume about his visit. That was published quite soon after the trip in 1890. And then Wallace went the year after. Wallace took a lot of persuading. I think it was Morris Buck that finally twisted his arm when he came over to visit. And so he went over there, and so he wrote up his own impression. So it was published as a single volume a few years later.
For anyone who is interested in Whitman's biography, I feel like that's seminal reading. And I really love the photos that they include as well. There's a very early photo, as I recall, of the birthplace in there that I actually wound up using in the exhibition that I put on at the Grolier Club with Susan Taine in 2019. So hard to find early images of the birthplace, but Johnston was meticulous in his notes and his recollections about what he saw and did when he was visiting Whitman.
Yeah, one of Johnston's many skills was he was a very good photographer, and so there's lots and lots of good quality black and white images that he took of the various Whitman meetings in Bolton, but also during his visit over to see Whitman, and they were published in the collection of Johnston and Wallace's visit. And one of the interesting things about, if anyone is familiar with photography, he was a great one for taking group photographs with him on it. He'd use a sort of shutter delay mechanism on one of these early plate cameras. And so you can see these pictures of the group of these guys stood there looking slightly amused, and the expression on Johnston's face is always as though he's just set the camera up, press the shutter, and then dash to the front of the camera, and he's looking sort of nonchalant. It's a great archive that's been left with these fantastic quality photographs that Johnston took.
That adventurous spirit of Johnston, and also a lot of details of his background, including his railway connection, remind me of Dr. Salveson over here.
Yeah, a different sort of doctor, that's the thing. But very, very, they were all complex characters. And one of the things that comes out quite a lot these days, actually, is the sort of sexual politics of this group. Were they gay? Some of them certainly were. Probably Johnston bisexual, Sixsmith certainly, and that there is a bit more evidence to confirm that, I suppose, with Sixsmith. And on the one hand, so these were respectable members of the Bolton middle class. Sixsmith became a key figure in the Bolton cotton industry. He managed one of the biggest mills in Bolton. He became the chairman of the local village council where he lived for many, many years, and was an authority on textile design. But there was also this side to him of being, his politics veered on being an anarchist. He was big friends, possibly lovers, with Edward Carpenter, regarded as Edward Carpenter's personal physician. And
interesting.
That
whatever that means.
Physician was interpreted very widely. And so, there was this very interesting conflict between Edwardian respectability and quite radical politics.
That's very all exciting. I want to go back to the railway connection because, as you know, I'm living in London this year, and it always strikes me how the British love their trains. And you are certainly no exception to that. I have to tell this anecdote. We were up in Yorkshire visiting the Bronte country, and specifically we were in the Parsonage Museum, the Bronte Parsonage Museum, and we had planned to meet Paul, at a train station, sort of on our way up to the lakes. And I got a text from Paul saying, "You must leave immediately. There is a storm coming and the trains are going to shut down." And you know what? I did not even hesitate, because I know that Paul knows the trains in such a deep way. It's actually moving to me. So Paul, we must know, what is the root of your love of the trains?
Well, I was brought up in Bolton, more or less next to the locomotive depot. In English, a depot isn't the station. The depot is the shed where the locos were maintained. And so I was literally 50 yards away from there. So as a child, very young, 5 or 6 years old, I used to sort of hang around the depot, looking at the engines. And as I got older, into my teens, I got to know quite a lot of the drivers, the engineers, and I would sort of go out on trips with them overnight, sometimes acting as the fireman or the stoker of the locos. So I was, although I was born in 1952 and steam traction in Britain finished in 1968, I probably had 2 or 3 years where I was actually doing the sort of things that somebody quite a bit older than me would normally have done. I even drove some locos on trains. obviously with the driver's supervision. So I was very, very lucky to have experienced that. And it was that gave me a lifelong love and interest of the railways, which shows no sign of abating, actually, but much to the amusement of my friends and family.
There is something so magnetic about especially the steam rail, right? I guess that people obsess over keeping them going. We rode one of the steam rails. Yeah, go ahead.
It's a big industry in Britain, and pretty big in the States as well, it has to be said. There's lots of quite long heritage railways, like the Durango and Silverton Railway, and Mount Washington Cog Railway, which I've always wanted to go and see. That sounds amazing. But in Britain, we've probably about 120 different lines which have been taken over by volunteers. They run as very successful businesses. They've gone through a very difficult time with COVID, but they're all springing back into life now and doing very well. And we also have quite a lot of steam on, if you like, the main line. A few weeks ago, we did a really nice ride through the Peak District behind a steam loco, and that was absolutely wonderful. Brought back a lot.
I know that you. Oh, I'm sorry. I interrupted you. Sorry.
No, I said it just brought back a lot of nice memories.
Well, that's what it's about, and I know you have written extensively about the rail, right, and the rail's connection with socialism. I'm thinking about the Rail Politic book. Do you want to talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I did that about 10 years ago, looking at different models for how we run our railways, and I think that's become a sort of a perennial British hobby, looking at how to rework how to run our railways, and we're currently going through another reorganizing.
Oh, I know about this, Paul, because we coming down from the north, you really experience it, right? Because is it right that the money is not really being put into the northern lines as it should be? Well,
yeah, there's a historic lack of investment in railways and probably most other things in the north of England. It's something that's always been there as a burning sense of injustice. And in recent years, there's been a lot more investment going into the southeast, London particularly, than in the north. In fairness, there has been some investment going into the railroads up here, but it's still, as you'll find yourself being based in London, that the quality of transportation in London is really way ahead what we've got in most towns and cities in the north of England. It's a big city. It lends itself well to mass transportation, whereas it becomes more difficult the smaller communities get. So, the sort of ideas I was putting forward in Rail Politic was really saying that railways should be run as social, what we call social enterprises. I don't know if you're familiar with that term in the States, or not-for-profit companies, where what surplus the railway makes goes back into improving the quality of the service and investing in new trains, better stations, and so on and so on. So we're still a long way off that aspiration, but who knows? There's a lot of change going on at the moment.
I know so there was the Rail Politic book, but you've also written about the rail historically. So it's both a political and historical focus of your life. I know that you're a visiting assistant professor. Is it at Huddersfield?
Yeah, we have a slightly different structures in Britain. We don't really have assistant professors. The hierarchy tends to be lecturer, senior lecturer, reader. I suppose a reader is more of an assistant professor, whereas I'm a visiting professor, which doesn't mean very much. It's a nice title to have on your CV, and it gives you an in to, and it's both Huddersfield, where I'm a visiting professor in logistics and transport, whereas Bolton, I'm a visiting professor in Worktown Studies. Now, Worktown is an interesting one. It's very much about the Bolton's cultural history, and in the 1930s there was the Worktown project, which was part of a mass observation scheme, which was done by a funny group of Southern English eccentrics by and large, who spent a lot of time just hanging around pubs, football ground and various other places, listening to people and writing down what they were talking about. And it's become quite an important archive, actually. Most of it's down at Sussex University now, but there is a lot of material up in Bolton as well. And it's very interesting trying to tickle out the reactions of people in Bolton themselves who were the subject of this anthropological spying, if you like. So there's all sorts of interesting issues there around sort of class relations and people feeling that actually, you know, we don't actually want to be spied on by these Burkes from London.
So these two hats that you're wearing, you're teaching would sound like related subjects, but not the same at the two different.
No, they're not. And so at Huddersfield, I do the occasional lecture for undergraduates on rail policy, I guess you could call it, but also do a lot of informal work, helping out undergraduates and postgraduate students, just sort of pointing them in particular directions, chatting to them like we're chatting now, really, about the work that they're doing. Whereas in Bolton, say, similar, really. One of the most interesting projects I suppose I led on was the transfer, and this was all happening during COVID, so it was bloody difficult. The Lancashire Authors Association, which goes back to 1909, it was set up by Alan Clark, who was an avid Whitmanite. and how I first got into Whitman was through Alan Clark's writings. He set up the Lancashire Authors Association to bring together mostly working class men and women writers, not exclusively writers. It was called for writers and lovers of Lancashire literature. And so it was a network of writers who used to meet, and it developed in a very formal way, actually, which is a strength, really, because it ensured continuity. They would meet 3 or 4 times a year, different towns around Lancashire. They would invariably invite the local mayor to come along and open the proceedings. So the mayor would turn up in full regalia, but then they'd have a great time, getting lectures, talks, and so on. And in 1921, I think it was, they decided to, because they'd inherited a collection of lots of books and writings, so they said it would be a good idea to set up our own library. So that was the beginning of the Lancashire Authors Association Library, which developed into the biggest collection of regional literature in the UK. Wow. But there's always been a problem of where to put it, because as it got bigger, it started off being in the living room of the librarian in this fairly large house.
This. Yes, it always starts this way. Something good starts.
A bit like all this stuff here behind me. I don't know where all that's going to go
nice.
when I go. So then it transferred to the new Manchester Central Library, which opened in the 1930s. And they were very, very, as all the libraries have been. For some reason, it moved from Manchester to Accrington, which is a smaller town in East Lancashire. And so it was hosted by Accrington Library, but they struggled with the sheer size of it. So it became apparent that they'd actually quite like if somebody would take it off their hands and look after it. They'd be more than happy to assist in the transfer. So the University of Bolton were persuaded by me and a couple of friends, including Bob Snake, that it would be a great idea to have the collection as a special collection in the University of Bolton. And so to cut a very long story short, that's what's happened. The collection is being catalogued at the moment. The library staff are amazingly enthusiastic about it. There's lots of the students who are doing work on Victorian studies are finding it a really valuable source of material. And so it's available now to anybody. You know, you make an appointment, you can go in and look at the collection in comfort, whereas up until the last few years, it was basically all in a storeroom in the upstairs of Accrington Library. So it's a massive improvement, and we're hoping to get some funding through the Heritage Lottery to develop it further, to do outreach work in the Northwest generally, alerting people to what's there and rekindling an interest in, because a lot of it's in dialect. The LAA wasn't specifically a dialect writers group, but I would say probably 75% of them did write in Lancashire dialect rather than standard English.
Wow. Well, what an accomplishment. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, there's still lots of interest there. Some of it's latent, you know, when you get people to say, oh yeah, I can remember my grandma and my granddad speaking like that, using those words. And so even, you know, kids coming from sort of Southern Asian backgrounds, they speak with very strong Lancashire accents, and they have an interest actually when you start talking to them about the dialect and how it linked into the textile industry, which many of their parents came over to Lancashire and Bolton particularly to work in the mills. So it all sort of links together in an interesting sort of way.
Is this a good time to mention socialism with a Northern accent?
Yeah, because it does link to the Bolton Whitman group. Because one of the things about Wallace and Johnston, they were both members of the Independent Labour Party, which was set up in the 1890s. It was particularly strong in the north of England, and you can make too much of the distinction between the ILP and other groups, but the other socialist organisation, which was also quite strong in Bolton at the time, was the Social Democratic Federation, which was more Marxist, whereas the ILP wasn't. And it developed what's been loosely termed as an ethical socialist position. So it was certainly influenced by Christianity. Alan Clark was another member of the ILP, and he was had a very cosmopolitan worldview. You know, he was influenced by Hinduism and Buddhism. And so all this somehow came together into this ethical socialist tradition, which people like Keir Hardie, one of the early leaders of the Labour Party, exemplified. So Johnston and Wallace were part of all that. You know, they would go along to meetings of the ILP, and also the Labour Church, which was again very much a north of England phenomenon primarily. And the Labour Church used to sort of meet in every Sunday, and it was basically a debating society, very much aligned with the ILP, but not part of it. And other Whitmanites like Alice Collinge, for instance, who became prominent in the 1920s, she was the organist at the Labour Church. So there are all those connections. And my book, Socialism with a Northern Accent, was very much about saying, well, there were regional traditions in socialism in Britain, which are quite distinct, and you can't just boil it all down to a sort of single unified way of looking at the world. And very often some, I would say, lazy historians have seen groups like the Fabian Society, who were very much sort of London centred, as being somehow what it was all about, but it was more complicated than that. Like in Scotland and Wales were very, very different traditions. I think in Wales itself, in the North Wales, in Snowdonia, was a very, very distinctive radical culture that grew out of liberalism and non-conformity, and became a very, very radical movement. in some of the coal mining areas, there are a very strong mining tradition up in the northeast, around Middlesbrough, in the iron ore mines. So it's a very, very complicated picture. And I think the more you look at it, the more complicated it becomes.
So fascinating. And to me, fascinating how Whitman is often a link, because as you know, I've been working at Conway Hall down here in London, which is the descendant, the most recent name of the South Place Ethical Society, which is also one of these socialist movements. And the namesake of Conway Hall is Moncure Conway, who was Whitman's first literary pilgrim.
Yeah, and that hadn't occurred to me, and it was interesting because literally right opposite Conway Hall was the headquarters of one of the big railway companies in England, which I used to work for, Arriva, which in turn is owned by German Railways. Typical,
so right there in Red Lion Square, then.
It was not on Red Lion Square. It was on the other side. It was, if you like, at the back of it. And I've heard of Conway Hall and the South Place Ethical Society for a long, long time, but I never made that link with Moncure Conway. So that's thanks to you that I've discovered that.
To be continued, because I may well give a talk up in Bolton on Moncure. I think he was known in those circles as well. And down here at Conway Hall on June 7th, we will be having a celebration of the Whitman-Conway link. But it's very exciting to talk with you and to learn about these movements. And then, of course, to think about how Whitman informs and kind of shapes those. Can you tell us a bit about how did you get to Whitman in the first place?
Well, there was sort of two different aspects there, and I'll say a bit more about Whitman and his influence on the socialist movement, particularly ethical socialism, in a moment. But I got to Whitman, first of all, back in, must have been early mid-70s. I bought a copy of Whitman's selected poems by Seven Seas Publication, or Seven Seas Publishing, which was actually an East German publishing house. In the former socialist countries and Soviet Union, Whitman was always very, very popular. He was seen as exemplifying American progressive literature. And I think I just came across, I'd heard of Whitman, but I'd not read any of his stuff, but I really liked his poetry. Didn't think much more about it, but it was only through doing this research on Alan Clark in 1976, 1977. There's a book which I've got here. I'll have to hold it in front of my head so you can see it. It's a rather battered edition of Moorlands and Memories, and it was published in 1920, and it's basically a collection of a series of articles that he wrote for the local press about the Lancashire moors, and he often describes his cycle rides. And there was this, I just reading through, and I came across this section about a bike ride from Bolton to Blackpool. And he says, at Anderton, I call on Wallace, the Walt Whitman disciple, and recall a ramble in 1913 with the Bolton Whitmanites and friends, including poet Lloyd from New Jersey, up Babylon Lane and across the fields to Rivington to celebrate the birthday of the great American singer of comradeship and immortality. It's very interesting how he, what he sees as important. It was May 31st, but we had rain and hail and thunder that day, and then sunshine, typical Bolton weather, really. But we enjoyed the gleesome song through our fields and hillsides, and after a tour of Lever Park, were the waste merchant, commented in his own droll way on the outdoor menagerie. The waste merchant is Fred Wilde, who I mentioned before. We had tea at the foot of the pike in the old manse of the Reverend S. Thompson, our genial Scotch host. And then he goes on to say, it's fitting that Bolton should be distinguished above all towns in England by having, over many years, been in close touch by letter and visit with the master. For I am sure Walt Whitman, the singer of outdoor life, would have loved to ramble our Lancashire moorlands. So I was reading that, I thought, well, bloody hell, you know.
That's the Whitman Walk.
So I went down to the library, and so I knew the local studies library staff very well, and said, well, have you got anything about Walt Whitman? So where do you want to start? And so they brought out these boxes, completely uncatalogued, and it was literally a treasure trove of material. There were original letters from Keir Hardie, from Edward Carpenter, from Whitman himself. And it was just absolutely astonishing. And
Wow.
so it was really out of that I started doing some more serious research on it, which led to, the book, which has gone through various editions. It was just a sort of typescript, really, the first one that I did. But,
with Walt Whitman in Bolton. So did the library know about the archives before you dug into them?
Yeah, they certainly did. And I think the library staff have always been very, very proud of it. And so they were pleased that somebody was showing an interest in it. I think there'd been, over the years, the group died out probably from the late 50s or early 60s. There were one or two people who kept the flame just about flickering, and there was the occasional visit of American academics in the 60s and maybe 70s, but it had almost completely died out then. So it was 1984 when we revived the annual Whitman Day celebration with the original Loving Cup, which had been brought over by J.H. Johnston, one of Whitman's friends.
Yes.
And that's
the jeweler. He's the jeweler, right? The New Yorker.
That's right. Yeah. So he clearly made it. So for several years, we used to take the Loving Cup out onto the moors and fill it with spiced claret, as the original Whitmanites did, and pass it round. A Loving Cup, for those of you unfamiliar with it, it's a sort of three-handled jug that you pass it round. So there's always two people holding the cup, so it symbolises friendship and comradeship, Loving Cup. And also the other feature of it is that everybody would always wear a sprig of lilac in the lapel. Again, when lilacs dooryard bloomed. And so it's a great tradition, and we've kept it going. There were 1 or 2 years, I think, where we didn't quite get our act together, but certainly in the last 15, 20 years, it's been a regular event. So there's an unbroken tradition, which I think will just continue. Hopefully there'll be a new generation taking over from us, and you'll be able to enjoy it on the 28th of May this year. So the weather's good.
The last time I did it, Paul, the BBC came along.
Right, yeah, it was
2009, I think that was. But it's gotten its share of press, right? It's become a thing. It's something people really look forward to.
Yeah, it's not a massive event, and I think that's good. It's sort of nice and cozy and friendly and informal. A typical year would be 25 to 30 people coming along, quite a mixture, quite a lot of kids very often, who enjoy it. It's a lovely walk. It's not too arduous, so most abilities are quite able to do it.
And there are readings throughout, right?
Yeah,
and I think
that's right.
Is it right that you pass some Johnston landmarks, right? The plaques.
Well, not Johnston. We set off from Barrow Bridge, which is a sort of traditional beauty spot, and just on the outskirts of Bolton. And we sort of walk up through a sort of narrow valley, which is very pretty, and then out onto the moors, and you come to an old settlement called Walker Fold. Fold is a traditional Lancashire term for just a sort of group of houses out in a more rural setting. Typically it would have been a handloom weaving community. And certainly from the early 1900s, there was quite a large house there, belonging to a guy called John Ormrod, who's a key figure in the later years of the Whitmanites. And again, it goes against this image that Whitman had, that the Bolton Whitmanites were these sort of, you know, simple working class folk who liked his poetry. They weren't working class, with one or two exceptions. Ormrod was part of the big textile dynasty of Ormrods who owned several mills in Bolton. He was one of the richest men in Bolton. And yet he was an avid Whitmanite and socialist veering on anarchist. And he used to go over to the States quite often on business, and he would meet up with some of the leading figures of the American anarchist movement. So I think the American police would have taken great interest in this character's movement. So he was a very tall guy as well, so he'd stand out in a crowd. So he used to host the later visits of, or the later Whitman celebrations. There's a nice photograph of them all sort of sat there at Walkerfall looking. Let's see if, I don't know how well you can see it on the, where are we? And it's interesting that unlike the earlier photographs where it's all blokes, it's fairly evenly spread. Now let me see where I'll put that in front of my head. Can you see that?
Oh, there we go. Yeah. We can, and people can stop the video to look too. Yeah.
So that's. Oh, there's the tall guy at the back.
Oh, right. He is tall. I can see that.
Apparently, he was the first man in Bolton to have a motor car, which again gives an idea of his general status.
Well, I have to say, Whitman has always attracted a very diverse audience, right? Like I even think about the board of the Whitman Initiative, and we have everybody on there. So it really makes sense, actually, what you say. And from what I remember of the event, and I'm hoping our listeners really consider joining because it is so lovely on May 28th this year. It is out in nature, right? And people, do they select? I forgot how we did it. There were readings, but were they assigned, or should people just read what they wanted?
Totally spontaneous. People are encouraged to bring along examples of the favourite Whitman poem. I quite often bring this. You know, it's a very tattered volume of.
Oh, we have to see it, Paul, the famous Paul Salveson Walt Whitman book. Let's see.
Well, it's all.
Is this the one that's been with you the whole time?
No, I don't know what's happened to that. This is probably, when was this one published? This, it says it was 1979, so I've had it quite a while. And, you know, it is a very good full collection. It's the
Well, let's have a look, yeah.
Yeah, so it's a nice.
Oh, right.
Well,
with the Thomas Eakins swimming hole on the cover, a close-up of that.
All right, is that yeah?
Yeah, that's supposedly inspired by the
swimming hole by Thomas Eakins, yeah.
The 28 Bathers passage from Song of Myself supposedly inspired Eakins to that. And in the Philadelphia Museum of Art, if you ever come visit, Paul, because you've planned lots of visits, but you must come to the States again and you know, meet all of us and do the Song of Myself marathon in person and all that.
Yeah.
But in the Philadelphia Museum of Art, there is a beautiful portrait of Whitman done by Eakins too.
Right. Yeah, no, that would be really nice to do. And so as well as my Whitman friends like yourself and Mike Robertson and well, sadly, Joanne Craig died a few years ago, which was really sad. But I've also got a good friend in Brooklyn who's a railroad professional, Mike Weinman. And he quite often, you know, he knows of my Whitman interest, and he'll quite often send me a cutting that's something to do with Whitman in America, which is really nice.
Well, we'll have to bring all the worlds together. And in fact, they're brought together in England this year because Michael Robertson, the eminent Whitman scholar, is now living in London. So
right. Yes,
he's down here with me, and we've been corresponding. He's a wonderful mentor for me. And hopefully we'll all three see each other in a matter of weeks.
Yeah, that will be great. And perhaps a meeting in London as well.
would love that at Conway Hall. What more
Yeah,
appropriate place would
indeed.
there
Yeah.
be?
As again, going back to the historic underinvestment in the North's transport system, it's a lot easier for me to get to London than across to, say, Hull or even Leeds in some ways, to be honest, even though in mileage terms they're very close.
Well, I, for one, am absolutely looking forward to seeing you and also to go to Bolton. Such a wonderful group of people. And as you say, a real cultural hub and a place that's kind of given birth to itself, just wonderful people living there and a sense of community spirit that I think Whitman would have absolutely adored.
Yeah, and I
In
think
many ways.
right.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Well, I think Alan Clark's comments about why this link between Bolton and Whitman and how Whitman would have loved the sense of comradeship and the moorland are absolutely right. Although, if people ask, well, why should Bolton have this remarkable link? It's very much down to one man, really, and that was Wallace. No, but how he came to get the Whitman bug in the first place, again, is one of those things that who knows.
And living here has showed me more this time than the last time I lived in London, that Whitman is not at the tip of everyone's tongue, right? Like when you think of American literature here, you see a lot of Poe or Hawthorne. I see a lot of Emily Dickinson editions, but Whitman is kind of off the radar. And that's what makes this even more special. Maybe, what do you think it is? Is it just he's too radical for sort of a general audience here?
No, I don't think it's that. I'm not sure what it is, but I don't think it's. I think reading Whitman now, he is remarkably modern, and he speaks to themes which were certainly revolutionary when he was writing. But now, about sexuality, about spirituality, about the open air, democracy, diversity, all these things are remarkably modern. So I think we need another Wallace. See, the great thing about Wallace, he probably got on some people's nerves by just badgering them, as he did with Robert Blatchford, the socialist journalist, Keir Hardie, and various others, saying, "Oh, here's an article, and here's a collection of Whitman. Make sure you have a look at such and such a page." And so he really bludgeoned people into becoming Whitmanites. And so I think it's much more difficult these days, and there's so much else around. So I don't know the answer to your question, to be honest, why Whitman isn't more well regarded, because obviously, I think he's grown in stature fairly gradually, I think, over the years in the States. Whereas here, maybe it sort of goes in. I think he was probably better known in the 70s in literary terms, actually,
right,
than now. So you'll have to stay in England a bit longer, Karen, and go around evangelizing.
Light that fire again. Yes, absolutely. I'm determined to work with you on that.
Yeah,
and Paul, yeah. I feel like we could talk forever. We always try to end the show on the hour, so I'm going to have to bring us sadly to a close here, but we'll continue in person, and I hope others listening will join us also in May. But before we do you have something to leave us with, a favorite Whitman quote maybe that has inspired you?
And it is my favourite Whitman quote, and it's very appropriate actually to be finishing with, instead of being sat here on a very uncomfortable chair, I must say. Let's get away from these books and libraries and Zoom meetings and get out there into the countryside. And it's the opening of Song of the Open Road. Afoot and light-hearted, take to the open road. Healthy, free, the world before me. The long brown path before me, leading wherever I choose. Henceforth, I ask not good fortune, I myself am good fortune. Henceforth I whimper no more, postpone no more, need nothing. Done with indoor complaints, libraries, Zoom meetings. Change that. Strong and content, I travel the open road. The earth, that's sufficient. I don't want the constellations any nearer. I know they're very well where they are. I know they suffice for those who belong to them. And so it goes on. Wonderful poem, and really it always inspires me to get out. And I'm very lucky where I live here on the edge of Bolton. I can be out of my doorstep, and I'm in woodland within half a minute, and then on the moors in 10 minutes.
Beautiful. Speaking of inspiration, Paul, thank you for your own inspiration. You are and remain a great inspiration to me and to many, many people that I know. So happy to have this conversation that we can watch again and enjoy. And the reading, you're talking directly to me. In my children's book on Whitman, that's the first poem I start with. I just love it too. So thank you so much, Paul, for joining us, and looking forward again to Whitman Weekend, May 28th and 29th this year. And thank you all. Thank you, Tristan, behind the scenes, for being the puppeteer here. We really appreciate it. And everybody who tuned in, thank you so much for supporting us. Okay, everyone, till next month. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Karen. Pleasure.
You're so welcome, Paul.
Cheerio.